For thousands of generations, Kuaka have been making epic journeys back to Aotearoa. Ngāti Pāoa Uri Glen Tupuhi says his tupuna recall the summer skies being clouded with manu.
In former times, they would blacken the sky. They would block out the sun by just lifting off the flats. And of course, they did cull them. They were a source of protein in a country that's heavily reliant on fish and birds. It was a bird paradise, of course. And so our tupuna did cull the birds and trap them, and it was part of their diet.
Glen grew up in the Hauraki settlement of Kaiowa, where Kuaka would flock to the food-rich shorelines after leaving their nest in the Great Siberian and Alaskan tundra.
What were some of those stories that you heard about Kuaka growing up and the significance to Ngāti Pāoa?
Hoki mahara ki te wā e tipu mai ana, nā wā tai tamariki ana kei rere kei a Kaiawa, e noho nei kei rere kei te taha toku nei kraua, me o rātou nā whānau katoa o reira. We walked to school, and even the generations before us. And the Kuaka and the Godwits, at that time, there were nesting places everywhere. We lived with the birds and the seagulls, many species of seagulls. The seagulls sat on the ridge of the school, on the top ridge of the roof, and they did their business there, and it got washed into the tanks, and we drank the water out of the tanks. So we lived in harmony with the birds, whether we liked it or not.
Kuaka hold a special place in te ao Māori. It's believed their migration helped guide kupe and other navigators to Aotearoa. But today they're under serious threat, with the Kuaka now endangered across the country.
The fact that they're still here is a miracle. Considering the onslaught, considering the loss of habitat, considering the mammalian predators and those rats and mice and possums, and they are prolific killers. The fact that we've still got Kuaka is a miracle in itself. That shows you about the survival instinct of a bird that leaves itself so vulnerable to predation. The Hauraki has changed so much with the silt that's coming off the Hauraki plains as a result of agricultural use, the gold mining, and what that does. We have grossly accelerated that concentration of heavy metals that are in the ground and heavy minerals by mining, and of course eventually it has to be released, and it's being released into Tikapa Moana very slowly, but it's still having an accelerated impact on the water quality, and of course it settles on the flats, and that's where the birds feed.
That's pretty amazing. They're a tiny little thing, and just to see, to think that they travel that far in such, I guess, all sorts of weathers that they battle.
Not only has Ngāti Pāoa been active in its own rohe, Gary Thompson travelled to China, a place where the Kuaka make a pit stop on their way to Aotearoa.
What was the purpose of you going over there to represent Ngāti Pāoa?
So the purpose of the visit, the trip, was to try and influence, I guess, the Chinese political systems to do something different with some of the areas where the Kuaka and the Pāho stop in Beijing and Hebei in the Yellow Sea area, where they've done a lot of commercial activity up there, and it's affected the habitat. And so our people down here were starting to notice that the numbers were starting to deplete, and the fruits of that hepoi was the fact that the Minister for State Forestry Administration in China travelled down to New Zealand a year later to sign a memorandum of agreement to agree to do as much as they can to retain these wetland habitats for these birds.
That agreement was signed at the Pūkorokoro Shorebird Centre, a research and education facility.
The Shorebird Centre opened in 1990, and Ngāti Pāoa did a palfrey and blessed the building at the time. So we've had a long-standing partnership, but we're now poised to expand on that in a big way, working in genuine partnership with them in terms of management of this coastline.
The centre is managed by Keith Woodley. who keeps a close eye on the Kuaka.
I haven't had a good count today, but I had a count of 4,000 earlier. And we had about 500 approximately stayed on the Firth Tikapa Moana over the winter. That's quite normal, mainly immature birds.
One Kuaka was tracked flying 12,000 kilometres in a non-stop 8-day flight.
Getting the individual migration routes of individual birds over 2 consecutive years is a major advance. And also of note in the birds behind me were the 9 juveniles that I saw just now. And so the significance of that is those birds are only barely 4 months old, and they've already flown the Pacific from Alaska to New Zealand non-stop. So quite an extraordinary story.
Kuaka can be found from Te Rerenga Wairua to Farewell Spit and are a source of pride for the iwi they live amongst.
Would you like to see other iwi have races between different manu? Or?
Well, there's some of those birds, they return to the same nest every year. And so for the ones that come back to, I guess, the Kaipara, and the ones that go back to the far north, maybe we get to tag a couple there then and have a bit of a race out between the different areas.
We could have a competition against other rohe. You fellas, you put a tracking device on your bird, and we'll see which one wins. And just things like that to raise the awareness of the plight of these birds. They have such a fragile hold on survival. We just do not know just how fragile it is.
The fragile hold, Glen says, we can't let slip any further.
Whakarongo ki te tangi ata manu e karanga nei tui tuia, and listen to the cry of the birds. And as I heard one eloquent speaker explain it, can we live in harmony with you? Can we coexist? The birds were here first, and clearly mankind is struggling to live in harmony with himself, let alone the birds are a casualty. The birds, like te taiao he katoa, are a casualty of our existence and our population growth.
Te Kuaka mā rangaranga, ko tahi manu I tau ki te tāhuna, tau atu, tau rā.